Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating story of survival, migration, and the forging of a brand new cultural identity. We're going to explore the historic links to Britain of the Krios of Sierra Leone. The story of this unique ethnic group involves multiple waves of forced and voluntary resettlement across continents, all culminating on the coast of West Africa. Now, right off the bat, I want to mention that all the historical facts, dates, and figures we're going to cover in this explainer are sourced directly from the website thekurios.com. We're sticking strictly to their documented historical record to make sure everything we discuss today is completely accurate. So, who exactly are the Krios? Well, they're an ethnic group in modern-day Sierra Leone, over in West Africa. But their roots? They are incredibly diverse. We're talking about the direct descendants of African-American, Caribbean, and African ex-slaves and freemen who were actually resettled by the British. It's a history that's deeply tied to Britain's historical involvement in the slave trade and the abolition movements that followed. To see how this culture was born, we're going to break this explainer down into 5 parts. First, the Black Poor settlers. Second, the Nova Scotian arrivals. Third, the Jamaican Maroons resettled. Fourth, the liberated Africans. And finally, the birth of Creole culture. Keep this timeline in the back of your mind as we go. We start in 1787 with the Black Poor settlers, jump to 1792 with the Nova Scotians, hit 1800 with the Maroons, and wrap up the major waves starting in 1808 with the liberated Africans. Let's get into it. Part 1. The Black Poor settlers, from London to Granville Town. So, why did anyone leave London for Sierra Leone back in 1787? Well, you have to look at what was happening in Britain. In 1772, Lord Chief Justice Mansfield officially declared slavery illegal in Great Britain. This was a huge legal win, heavily pushed by abolitionists like Granville Sharp and Oladua Equiano. But skip ahead to the end of the American Revolutionary War. London suddenly had thousands of freed slaves living in extreme poverty and facing severe unemployment. To help out, philanthropists formed the Committee for the Relief of the Black Poor in 1786. It was Granville Sharp and the highly influential Clapham sect, guys like William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson, who actually pushed this idea of creating a province of freedom in Africa for their resettlement. But here's the thing. This plan sparked a massive historical debate, and according to theokrios.com, it's a debate that's still going on today. Was this province of freedom purely altruistic, a genuine fresh start? Or was the underlying key motive just to deport an impoverished Black population off the streets of London? It's a really complex question that hangs over this entire first wave of migration. Whatever the true motives were behind closed doors, the plan happened. On April 9th, 1787, exactly 411 immigrants boarded ships and set sail for Sierra Leone. And this group, collectively known as the Black Poor, was wildly diverse. We're talking Black Americans, Africans, Caribbeans, and even a few Bengalis. Oh, and importantly, the records show there were a few dozen white women on board too. Now, traditional history has often unfairly pegged these women as London prostitutes, but setting the record straight, the actual facts show they were much more likely the wives and girlfriends of the settlers. Anyway, they arrive in May 1787 and build Granville Town. But it was a complete tragedy. Between terrible diseases and hostility with the local indigenous people, the colony was absolutely devastated. By early 1791, only 64 of those original settlers were even left. Moving on to Part 2, the Nova Scotian arrivals, resilience and the founding of Freetown. The contrast between Wave 1 and Wave 2 is just night and day. Where the first wave faced immense tragedy, the second wave, the Nova Scotians, were unbelievably resilient. These folks were mostly skilled artisans and tradespeople. They didn't just survive, they thrived and built a completely new settlement called Freetown. This actually became the true foundation for the colony of Sierra Leone, eventually absorbing the survivors from Granville Town. In fact, they were so successful that by the 1820s, they had firmly established themselves as the Black bourgeoisie of the region. If you want to understand that resilience, look no further than Thomas Peters. See, most of these Nova Scotians were former American slaves who had won their freedom by escaping and fighting for the British during the Revolution. First, the British resettled them in Nova Scotia, Canada, but there they faced brutal discrimination compounded by the freezing Canadian winters. Thomas Peters just refused to accept it. He literally traveled all the way to London to formally protest how his community was being treated. And his advocacy worked. He came back and orchestrated their resettlement. In January 1792, about 1,200 Nova Scotians sailed to Africa across 15 ships. His legacy is so profound that the Creo Descendants Union even put up a statue in Freetown in December 2011 to honor him. All right, part 3, Jamaican Maroons resettled, the arrival of fierce fighters. So, the year is 1800, and this third wave brings a totally different energy to Freetown. The Maroons were these ferocious ex-slaves from the mountainsides of Jamaica, many with Ashanti and Fanti origins. These were people who had been fiercely fighting the British for a long time. But after the Trelawney Town Maroons lost the Second Maroon War, they were deported first to Nova Scotia, and eventually 600 of them were resettled in Freetown. Plus, they weren't alone. They were joined by disbanded West Indian soldiers from the 2nd and 4th Regiments. So you've got this massive influx of fierce, independent fighters integrating into the colony. Which brings us to part 4, the Liberated Africans, rescued from the seas. Everything shifts here thanks to a massive change in international law. In 1807, the British Parliament passed a monumental bill officially forbidding the slave trade anywhere within the British Empire. Suddenly, the Royal Navy is out actively policing the waters off West Africa. This single legal shift created our fourth and final settler group, the Liberated Africans, or Recaptives. Just picture the sheer scale of this for a second. The British Navy is out there literally intercepting slave ships and rescuing thousands upon thousands of people before those ships could ever reach the Americas. Starting in 1808, since it was usually impossible to return them to their specific inland homes, these rescued individuals were brought straight to Freetown. And because these ships were stopped all over the coast, the origins of these liberated Africans were incredibly vast. We're talking people from modern-day Nigeria and Congo, people of Yoruba, Igbo, and Bakongo stock. Others were captured from diverse coastal regions like Cameroon and Senegal. They just poured into Freetown, creating this unbelievably rich, diverse melting pot within the colony. And that leads us perfectly into part 5, Birth of Creole Culture, a unique mixed heritage. So let's put all the pieces of the puzzle together. You've got the Black Poor arriving in 1787, the Nova Scotians in 1792, the Maroons in 1800, and that massive wave of liberated Africans from 1808 onwards. The descendants of these 4 totally distinct settler groups, they are the ones who merged together to create the unique ethnic group we know today as the Krios.